The bitter October wind swept across the platform of the Yarrington, Nevada train station, cutting through Daisy Caldwell's worn shawl like it wasn't even there. Her trembling fingers cradled the small, barely perceptible swell of her stomach as tears streamed down her face, blurring the receding image of the afternoon train that had just departed, taking with it all of her hopes and the man who had sworn to love her forever. 3 o'clock westbound to Carson City now departed, called the station master, his voice as disinterested as his glance toward the young woman left behind on the platform. Daisy sank onto her single trunk, her 22 years of life suddenly feeling like 100. The letter in her pocket burned like a brand, James's handwriting explaining why he couldn't marry a woman carrying his child after all, how his family back east wouldn't approve, how he'd prepaid her ticket to Carson City, where she could find suitable arrangements. But he had never intended to join her. He'd simply put her on that train in Virginia City, kissed her goodbye, and vanished from the platform while she waved from the window, oblivious to his betrayal until the conductor came to collect her ticket and handed her the sealed note. She'd been so shocked she'd gotten off at the first stop here in Yarrington, unable to continue the journey to a city where she knew no one, where James had clearly intended for her to give up their baby to strangers or worse. Miss, station's closing soon. The station master regarded her with mild annoyance. You got somebody coming for you. Daisy shook her head, unable to form words. The realization that she was utterly alone in a strange town, 5 months pregnant, with less than $20 to her name, crashed over her like a wave. Can't stay here overnight, the station master said, his voice softening slightly at her obvious distress. Town's got a boarding house 3 streets over, though Mrs. Perkins is mighty particular about who she takes in. The implication was clear. A young woman, traveling alone, clearly with child and no ring on her finger, would find few doors open to her in a town like Yarrington. As the station master walked away, leaving her to her decision, Daisy heard the sound of spurs jingling on the wooden platform. She didn't look up, too lost in her misery to care who approached, until a deep voice broke through her thoughts. Looks like you've been left high and dry, madam. Daisy raised her head to see a man standing before her. He was tall, with broad shoulders beneath a dusty duster coat. A well-worn Stetson sat atop his head, shadowing piercing blue eyes set in a sun-weathered face. He wasn't handsome in the polished way James had been, but there was something striking about the quiet strength in his features. It's no concern of yours, she managed, attempting to maintain what little dignity she had left. He crouched down, bringing himself to eye level with her. Name's Ryder Blackstone. I run the Double B ranch outside of town. His eyes were kind as they briefly flicked to her stomach and back to her face. Couldn't help but notice you seem to be in a difficult spot. I'll be fine, Daisy lied, clutching her small reticule closer. Ryder's expression suggested he didn't believe her for a second. Got anywhere to go? Anyone expecting you? The direct questions broke something inside her, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. She shook her head mutely. He stood and extended his hand. Then, with all due respect, madam, you're not alone anymore. Daisy stared at his outstretched hand, suspicion warring with desperation. Why would you help a stranger? Because my mother taught me never to leave someone in trouble when I had the means to help. His voice held no artifice, just simple truth. I've got a wagon outside. My sister Martha runs the house at the ranch, plenty of room for a lady in need of shelter until you figure out your next steps. I can't accept charity, Daisy said, though her resolve was weakening. Not offering charity. Ranch always needs extra hands, even if just for cooking or mending. He glanced at her trunk. Unless you'd prefer to take your chances with Mrs. Perkins at the boarding house, who'll likely turn you away the moment she lays eyes on your condition. Daisy knew he was right. The practicality of her situation overwhelmed her pride. She had nowhere to go, no plan, and night was approaching. With reluctance born of necessity rather than desire, she nodded. "I accept your offer, Mr. Blackstone, at least until I can make other arrangements." A small smile touched his lips. "Just Ryder is fine, and you are, Daisy." Daisy Caldwell. He picked up her trunk with ease. "Well, Miss Caldwell, let's get you to the Double B before that wind picks up any more." As she followed him to the waiting wagon, Daisy had no way of knowing that this moment of desperation would mark the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one that would lead her through hardship and joy, danger and passion, in the unforgiving landscape of Nevada's high desert. Nor could she have guessed that the stern-faced cowboy offering her refuge would come to mean more to her than she could possibly imagine. The ride to the Double B ranch was quiet, the wagon creaking rhythmically as it traversed the rutted dirt road leading out of Yerington. October of 1878 was proving to be unseasonably cold, and Daisy huddled beneath a rough wool blanket Ryder had pulled from beneath the seat and handed to her without comment. "How far is your ranch?" she asked, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for nearly 20 minutes. "About 5 miles outside of town," Ryder replied, his eyes never leaving the road ahead. "Not as big as some spreads, but good grazing land. Been building it up for 7 years now. You're from around here originally," he shook his head. "Came west from Missouri after the war. Needed a fresh start." His voice held a note of finality that discouraged further questions about his past. Daisy understood boundaries. After all, she had plenty of her own. "I appreciate your kindness, truly, but I should make it clear that I don't expect to stay long. Once I've earned enough money, I'll be moving on." Ryder glanced at her then, his expression unreadable in the fading daylight. "Where to?" The question caught her off guard. She had no real destination in mind, just away from Virginia City, where whispers would follow her, away from the memory of James's betrayal. "I haven't decided yet. Somewhere I can make a decent life. For both of you," Ryder said quietly, nodding toward her stomach. Daisy instinctively placed a protective hand over her barely visible bump. "Yes." They lapsed into silence again as the wagon crested a small rise. Below them stretched a valley cradled by gentle slopes, with a creek winding through its center. Nestled against the eastern hillside sat a sprawling ranch house, larger than Daisy had expected, with several outbuildings and corrals nearby. Lights glowed warm and inviting from the windows as dusk settled around them. "That's home," Ryder said, a note of pride in his voice. "Not fancy, but solid." As they approached, Daisy could make out the details of the main house. It was built of sturdy logs with a stone foundation and a wide porch wrapping around the front. Smoke curled from 2 chimneys, promising warmth inside. Before they'd even come to a complete stop, the front door swung open and a woman stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps in her mid-30s, with the same striking blue eyes as Ryder, though her hair was a lighter shade of brown, pulled back in a sensible bun. "You're late for supper," she called out, then paused when she noticed Daisy. "And you've brought company." Ryder set the brake and jumped down from the wagon, coming around to help Daisy descend. "Martha, this is Miss Daisy Caldwell. She's in need of a place to stay for a while." "Miss Caldwell, my sister Martha." Martha's shrewd gaze took in Daisy's travel-worn appearance and lingered momentarily on her midsection before returning to her face. To Daisy's relief, her expression remained kind. "Well, you've certainly come to the right place if you're hungry." "I've made enough stew to feed an army," Martha said, her tone brisk but welcoming. "Ryder, bring Miss Caldwell's things to the blue room. Ben can help with the wagon." As if summoned by his name, a young man of about 18 emerged from one of the outbuildings. "Got company, Miss Martha?" he called. "Miss Caldwell will be staying with us for a time," Martha answered. "Take care of the horses, would you?" Daisy found herself shepherded into the house before she could properly process what was happening. The interior was surprisingly comfortable, with polished wooden floors covered by colorful rag rugs, sturdy furniture that showed signs of use but was well maintained, and a large stone fireplace where flames crackled cheerfully. "You look dead on your feet, poor thing," Martha said as she guided Daisy to a chair near the fire. "Sit here while I fetch you a cup of tea. You can wash up before supper." "Thank you," Daisy murmured, suddenly overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers. "I don't want to be a burden." Martha waved away her concern. "Nonsense. Any friend of Ryder's is welcome here." "Oh, but I'm not," Daisy began, then stopped, unsure how to explain. Martha paused, giving her a measured look. "Ryder doesn't bring people home lightly, Miss Caldwell. If he brought you here, there was good reason." She patted Daisy's shoulder. "Rest. We'll talk more after you've had something to eat." Left alone by the fire, Daisy sank deeper into the chair, the warmth and unexpected sanctuary making her eyelids heavy. She hadn't realized just how exhausted she was, not just physically, but emotionally drained from the events of the day. Ryder appeared in the doorway, carrying her trunk as if it weighed nothing. "Martha's getting your room ready," he said. "There's wash water and fresh towels whenever you're ready." "Why are you doing this?" Daisy blurted out, unable to contain the question any longer. "You don't know anything about me." He set the trunk down and regarded her steadily. "I know enough. You're in trouble, expecting a child, and have nowhere to go. That's all I need to know for now." He paused. "The rest is your business unless you choose to share it." "And if I turn out to be disreputable?" she challenged, thinking of how quickly society had turned on her once her condition became known. A faint smile crossed his face. "Miss Caldwell, I've found that people who worry about being disreputable usually aren't. It's the ones who make a show of their respectability you've got to watch out for." With that, he left her to her thoughts, his boots making solid sounds on the wooden floor as he headed back outside. Dinner that evening was a simple but hearty affair: beef stew, fresh bread, and preserved peaches for dessert. Besides Ryder and Martha, there was Ben, the young ranch hand she'd glimpsed earlier, and an older man introduced as Silas, who managed the horses and equipment. To Daisy's relief, no one questioned her presence or condition. The conversation flowed around her, focusing on ranch matters, local news, and plans for the coming winter. It was clear that, despite not being related by blood except for the siblings, these people formed a family unit of sorts. "Miss Caldwell," Martha said as they were finishing their meal, "Ryder mentioned you might be interested in helping around the house while you stay with us." "Yes, absolutely," Daisy responded eagerly. "I'm a capable cook and seamstress. I can clean, do laundry, whatever is needed." "Good," Martha nodded. "I could use the help, especially with winter coming on. We'll work out fair wages." Daisy blinked in surprise. "Wages? But you're already providing room and board." "Everyone who works earns their keep here," Ryder interjected from the head of the table. "That's how it's always been at the Double B." The matter-of-fact way he stated this, not as charity, but as simple fairness, made Daisy's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. It had been so long since anyone had treated her with basic dignity. Later, after helping Martha clear the dishes, Daisy was shown to a small but comfortable bedroom on the second floor. The Blue Room, as Martha had called it, featured faded blue curtains framing a window that overlooked the eastern slope. A sturdy oak bed with a colorful patchwork quilt, a washstand with a ceramic pitcher and bowl, and a simple dresser. "It's not fancy," Martha apologized, "but it's clean and the mattress is new last year." "It's perfect," Daisy said honestly. After weeks of boarding houses and one night on a hard train bench, the room looked like paradise. Martha hesitated in the doorway. "Daisy, may I call you Daisy?" When Daisy nodded, she continued, "I don't know your story and you don't have to tell it if you don't want to, but I want you to know that you're safe here." "Thank you," Daisy whispered, unable to say more past the lump in her throat. After Martha left, Daisy sank onto the edge of the bed, running her hand over the soft quilt. For the first time since discovering James's betrayal, she allowed herself to truly break down, sobbing quietly into her hands. They were tears of grief, yes, but also of relief that, for tonight at least, she and her unborn child had shelter, food, and the basic kindness of strangers. When her tears finally subsided, she moved to the window and looked out at the star-filled Nevada sky. The moon cast silver light across the landscape, illuminating the outlines of distant mountains. "We're going to be all right," she whispered to her unborn child, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. "Somehow, we're going to be all right." In the barn, Ryder brushed down his gelding, his movements methodical and precise. He was not a man given to impulsive decisions, yet today he had brought a pregnant, unmarried woman, a complete stranger, into his home. Martha hadn't questioned him outright, but he'd caught the curious glances she'd thrown his way throughout dinner. "You're turning soft, Blackstone," he muttered to himself, but he knew why he'd done it. Something about Daisy Caldwell's dignified desperation had struck a chord in him. He recognized the look of someone who had been abandoned by those who should have stood by them. He'd seen it in the mirror often enough after the war. Whatever her story was, she deserved better than to be left alone at a train station with night coming on and a child growing inside her. And Ryder Blackstone was not a man to walk away from someone in need, no matter how complicated it might make his life. The first week at the Double B passed in a blur for Daisy, as she settled into the rhythm of ranch life. True to her word, Martha put her to work immediately, cooking, cleaning, mending, and helping preserve the last of the fall harvest from the kitchen garden. It was hard work, but satisfying, and for the first time in months, Daisy felt useful. More importantly, she felt safe. No one at the ranch questioned her about her condition or the absence of a husband. Martha had simply shown her where things were kept, explained the daily schedule, and left her to find her place in the household. Ryder himself was often absent from the house during daylight hours, busy with ranch work. When their paths did cross at mealtimes or in the evening, he was unfailingly polite, but maintained a careful distance. Daisy wasn't sure if this was out of respect for her situation or simply his nature. On her 8th day at the ranch, Daisy was kneading bread dough in the kitchen when Martha entered, carrying a basket of eggs from the henhouse. "You've got a good touch with that," Martha commented, nodding at the smooth dough under Daisy's hands. "My bread always comes out tough as saddle leather." Daisy smiled. "My grandmother taught me. She always said bread needs gentle hands and a firm heart." "Smart woman, your grandmother." Martha began washing the eggs at the sink. After a moment of companionable silence, she asked, "How are you feeling? Any morning sickness?" Daisy's hands stilled briefly before resuming their work. "It's mostly past, just tired sometimes. That's normal. I helped deliver Mrs. Jensen's twins last spring, strong as an ox normally, but pregnancy had her napping like a cat." Martha hesitated before continuing. "Daisy, I don't mean to pry, but is there someone who should be notified about your whereabouts? Family who might be worried?" The question was asked gently, but Daisy tensed nonetheless. No, my parents died 3 years ago. There's no one. She focused intently on shaping the dough into loaves. Martha, about my condition. I understand if it makes you uncomfortable having me here. Martha dried her hands on her apron and turned to face Daisy fully. Let me be clear about something. This is Ryder's home and he invited you to stay. That's good enough for me. As for judgments. She shook her head firmly. I've lived long enough to know that life is rarely simple and people's stories are their own to tell when they're ready. Tears pricked at Daisy's eyes. Thank you, she whispered. Martha squeezed her shoulder. Besides, we could use some new life around here. Been too quiet since, she stopped abruptly. Since what? Daisy asked, curious at the sudden shift in Martha's demeanor. Martha busied herself arranging the clean eggs in a bowl. Nothing important. Now I'm heading into town this afternoon for supplies. Is there anything you need? Daisy recognized the deflection but didn't press. Everyone had secrets after all. No, thank you. I'm fine. After Martha left for town, Daisy finished the bread and set it to rise by the warm stove. With time to spare before starting dinner preparations, she decided to explore the ranch property a bit. The day was unseasonably warm for late October, the sun bright in a cloudless sky. She followed a well-worn path that led from the back of the house toward a small rise. As she crested the hill, she spotted a figure by the creek that ran along the property's eastern boundary. Even from a distance, she recognized Ryder's broad-shouldered silhouette. He was crouched by the water's edge, apparently examining something. Curious, Daisy made her way down the slope toward him. Her foot dislodged a small stone that clattered down ahead of her, alerting him to her presence. Ryder straightened and turned, his expression neutral as he watched her approach. Miss Caldwell. I hope I'm not disturbing you, she said, suddenly feeling like an intruder. I was just exploring a bit during my free time. Not at all, he gestured to the creek. I was checking the water level, needs to stay high enough through winter for the cattle. Daisy nodded, pretending to understand the intricacies of cattle ranching. An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by the gurgling of the creek and the distant lowing of cattle. Your sister went to town, she said finally, grasping for conversation. She usually does on Wednesdays. He squinted up at the sun. Should be back by supper. She's been very kind to me, Daisy ventured. You all have. Ryder shrugged, seemingly uncomfortable with the gratitude. It's nothing. It's not nothing to me, Daisy insisted. You took in a stranger, a pregnant, unmarried stranger without question. Most people wouldn't have done that. His blue eyes met hers directly. Most people haven't seen what I've seen. And what's that? She asked softly. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed and gestured to a large, flat rock by the creek. Might as well sit if we're going to talk. Daisy settled on the rock, arranging her skirts around her. Ryder remained standing, gazing out at the water. I fought in the war, he said after a long pause. 4 years of seeing men at their worst and sometimes at their best. After that, I came west because I couldn't stand being around people who thought they knew what mattered in life. He glanced at her. Out here, a person's worth isn't measured by where they came from or what mistakes they've made. It's measured by how they face each day, how they treat others, whether they keep their word. Is that why you helped me? Daisy asked. Because of what the war taught you. A faint smile touched his lips. Partly. Mostly because you looked like you needed help and I was in a position to give it. His expression grew serious again. The man who left you in that condition, he in the picture still? The blunt question took her by surprise. No, she answered honestly. He made it very clear he wants nothing to do with me or the baby. Ryder nodded, as if this confirmed something he'd already suspected. His loss, then. Before Daisy could respond to this unexpected statement, a shout from the direction of the house drew their attention. Ben was waving from the top of the rise. Ryder's coming in from the south fence line." "Be right there," Ryder called back. He turned to Daisy. "You should head back to the house. Getting chilly out here." As if to emphasize his point, a gust of wind swept across the creek, making Daisy shiver in her light shawl. She nodded and rose from the rock, brushing off her skirts. "Thank you for talking with me," she said. "For what it's worth, I think the war taught you the right things." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or appreciation, before he nodded curtly and strode away toward the ranch buildings. Daisy watched him go, struck by the contradiction of the man, so gruff and distant on the surface, yet capable of profound kindness. As October gave way to November, a routine developed. Daisy worked alongside Martha during the days, gradually taking on more responsibility in the house. In the evenings, she often sat by the fire in the main room, mending or sewing while the others engaged in quiet conversation or read. Occasionally, Ryder would play a harmonica, the melancholy tunes floating through the room like ghosts from another time. One evening, as the first snow of the season dusted the landscape, Daisy sat at the kitchen table sorting beans for the next day's soup. Martha had retired early with a headache, leaving her alone with her thoughts. The back door opened with a gust of cold air, and Ryder stepped inside, stomping snow from his boots. His cheeks were ruddy from the cold, his breath visible as steam in the warm kitchen. "Didn't expect anyone to still be up," he said, removing his hat and coat. "Just finishing up here," Daisy replied, oddly conscious of being alone with him in the quiet house. "Would you like some coffee? There's still some hot on the stove." He nodded gratefully, and she rose to pour him a cup. As she handed it to him, their fingers brushed briefly, sending an unexpected warmth up her arm. Daisy quickly turned away, busying herself with the beans again. Ryder settled into a chair across from her, cradling the steaming mug between his large, calloused hands. "Storm's picking up out there. Might be in for our first real blizzard of the season." "Will the cattle be all right?" Daisy asked, having learned enough about ranch operations over the past weeks to understand the dangers winter posed. "Should be. We brought the herd down from the high pastures last week. They're in the sheltered valley now." He sipped his coffee, watching her over the rim of the cup. "You're settling in well here." It wasn't quite a question, but Daisy answered anyway. "Yes, it feels peaceful. Good." He hesitated, then added, "Martha mentioned you might be interested in staying through the winter. The passes get treacherous once the heavy snows come." Daisy's hands stilled over the beans. She'd been avoiding thinking about her future plans, finding it easier to focus on the day-to-day. "Would that be all right, me staying longer?" "It's your decision," Ryder said, his tone carefully neutral. "But yes, you're welcome to stay as long as you need." "Thank you." She resumed her sorting, grateful for his matter-of-fact acceptance. "I've been putting aside some of my wages. By spring, I should have enough to move on." "Move on to where?" The question caught her off guard. I'm not sure yet. Somewhere I can make a fresh start." Ryder set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "Miss Caldwell, Daisy, there's something you should know." He leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "Word gets around in places like this. People in town are already asking questions about who you are and why you're staying at the Double B." A cold knot of dread formed in Daisy's stomach. "What kind of questions?" "The usual. Who you are, where you came from, why a young woman in your condition is living under the same roof as an unmarried man." His tone was matter-of-fact, but his eyes held a hint of concern. "Martha's presence helps, but it won't stop the gossip entirely." "I'm sorry," Daisy said softly, her cheeks burning with shame. I never meant to cause problems for you or your reputation. My reputation can take care of itself, Ryder replied dismissively. I'm more concerned about yours and about what happens when that child is born. The fear that had been her constant companion since discovering her pregnancy surged forward again. I'll be long gone by then. Will you? His gaze was steady. Where exactly? To do what? With a newborn? Tears of frustration pricked at Daisy's eyes. I don't know. I haven't figured it all out yet, but I won't impose on your kindness forever. That's not what I meant. Ryder ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of agitation. I'm trying to offer you a solution, but I'm making a mess of it. A solution? Daisy asked, confused. He took a deep breath. Marry me. Daisy stared at him, certain she had misheard. What? It would be a marriage of convenience, he continued, his tone businesslike. You'd have my name, protection for yourself and the child. No one would question your presence here. The baby would have a home, security. And what would you get out of this arrangement? Daisy asked, stunned by the proposal. A partner. Someone to help run the household properly. Martha's been talking about moving to Sacramento to be near our cousin's family. He met her gaze squarely. I'm not offering this out of pity, Daisy. You're a hard worker, sensible, and from what I've seen, kind-hearted. Those are qualities I value. But not love, she said softly. Something flickered in his eyes. I respect you. That seems a better foundation than many marriages start with. Daisy's mind whirled with conflicting emotions. Part of her was offended by the practical nature of his offer, as if she were a business transaction. Another part recognized the genuine kindness behind it, and a small, treacherous part wondered what it might be like to be Ryder Blackstone's wife, even in name only. I can't accept, she said finally. It's too much. You hardly know me. I know enough, he countered. But I understand your hesitation. The offer stands if you change your mind. He rose from the table. Think about it, that's all I ask. With that, he left her alone in the kitchen, the sound of his footsteps fading as he climbed the stairs to his room. Daisy sat motionless, the forgotten beans scattered before her as she tried to process what had just happened. Marriage to Ryder Blackstone. The idea was absurd, impractical, and yet it offered a solution to so many of her problems. Security for her child, a respectable name, a permanent home. All things she thought lost to her when James abandoned her. But could she marry a man she didn't love? Could she bind herself to someone who saw her as little more than a convenient housekeeper and mother for her child? As she finally retired to her room that night, Daisy's hand rested on her growing belly. What should I do? She whispered to her unborn child. But the baby offered no answers, and Daisy lay awake long into the night, listening to the howl of the wind as the blizzard engulfed the Double B Ranch in swirling white. The blizzard that had begun that night raged for 3 days, effectively cutting off the Double B from town and trapping its inhabitants together in the main house. For Daisy, it was both a blessing and a curse, giving her time to consider Ryder's proposal while also making it impossible to avoid his presence. To her surprise, he made no mention of their conversation, treating her exactly as he had before. If Martha noticed any tension between them, she said nothing, though Daisy occasionally caught the older woman watching them with a speculative gleam in her eye. On the 4th day, the storm finally abated, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine white drifts and crystal-clear blue skies. The men set about digging out paths between the buildings and checking on the cattle, while Martha and Daisy tackled the backlog of indoor chores that had accumulated. As Daisy hung freshly washed sheets in the large kitchen to dry, it was still too cold to use the outdoor clothesline. Martha broached the subject that had clearly been on her mind. My brother asked you to marry him, didn't he? she said without preamble, smoothing a pillowcase with practiced efficiency. Daisy nearly dropped the clothespin she was holding. "How did you know?" Martha smiled wryly. "I've known Ryder his entire life. He's been different these past few days, watching you when he thinks no one's looking, disappearing whenever we're in the same room." Heat rushed to Daisy's cheeks. "He offered a marriage of convenience, for the sake of my reputation and the baby." "Of course he did," Martha said with a small snort. "My brother wouldn't know how to court a woman properly if his life depended on it. Too many years alone out here." She pinned up another sheet. "What did you tell him?" "That I couldn't accept," Daisy admitted. "It's too much to ask of him." Martha gave her a long, considering look. "Is that the only reason?" Daisy hesitated. "No," she said finally. "I also can't imagine marrying a man who doesn't love me, who's only offering out of a sense of duty or kindness." "I see." Martha was quiet for a moment. "Did it occur to you that my brother might have feelings for you that he doesn't know how to express?" "That's absurd," Daisy protested. "He barely knows me. Ryder forms his opinions of people quickly, and they rarely change." Martha hung the last pillowcase and turned to face Daisy fully. "He wouldn't have asked if he didn't care for you, Daisy. That's not the kind of man he is." Before Daisy could respond to this startling assertion, the kitchen door burst open, bringing with it a gust of cold air, and Ben, the young ranch hand, his face flushed with exertion. "Miss Martha." "Come quick," he gasped. "It's Sela's his heart. Ryder sent me to fetch you while he tries to keep him comfortable." Martha immediately sprang into action, grabbing her medical kit from the cupboard. "Where is he?" "The south barn. He collapsed while helping clear the snow." "Daisy, bring hot water and extra blankets," Martha instructed as she wrapped herself in a heavy coat. "Follow our tracks through the snow." With that, she and Ben disappeared into the bright winter day, leaving Daisy to gather the requested supplies with shaking hands. Silas was well into his 60s, and while he was spry for his age, a heart attack in these conditions could be fatal. By the time Daisy reached the barn, struggling through knee-deep snow with her arms full of blankets and a jug of hot water, Martha was already kneeling beside Silas, who lay on a makeshift pallet of hay. Ryder crouched opposite his sister, his face grave as he held the older man's hand. "How is he?" Daisy asked softly as she set down her burdens. "Alive, but weak," Martha answered, not looking up from her examination. "I need to get his fever down and make him comfortable, but he shouldn't be moved far in this condition." "The house is too far in this snow," Ryder agreed, his expression tight with worry. "And the bunkhouse isn't warm enough." "What about the old cabin?" Ben suggested hesitantly. "It's just beyond the south pasture fence, much closer than the main house." Ryder considered this. "It hasn't been used in years, but the structure was sound last time I checked. Might work." He stood decisively. "Ben, hitch the sleigh and get it as close to the barn as possible. I'll carry Silas. Martha, gather whatever medical supplies you need." "Daisy." "I'll help, Martha," she said quickly, already moving to assist the older woman. Within 20 minutes, they had Silas bundled in blankets and secured in the sleigh, with Martha beside him monitoring his condition. Ryder took the reins, guiding the horses carefully through the snow-covered ground toward a small structure barely visible through the trees at the edge of the property. As they drew closer, Daisy could see it was a simple one-room cabin, built of logs with a stone chimney. It looked weathered but solid, half buried in snowdrifts that reached almost to the windows. "Ben and I will clear the entrance and get a fire going," Ryder announced as he brought the sleigh to a halt. "You two stay with Silas." The men worked quickly, shoveling a path to the door and disappearing inside. Soon, smoke began to curl from the chimney, and Ben emerged to help carry Silas inside while Martha gathered her supplies. "Daisy, Can you bring the water and extra blankets?" Martha called as she followed the men into the cabin. Inside, the cabin was cold but rapidly warming from the fire Ryder had built in the stone fireplace. A layer of dust covered the sparse furnishings: a small table, 2 chairs, a simple cupboard, and a narrow bed pushed against the far wall, where the men were carefully placing Sela's. For the next several hours, they worked together to stabilize the elderly ranch hand. Martha administered remedies from her medical kit. Ryder and Ben took turns keeping the fire stoked, and Daisy prepared hot compresses and brewed willow bark tea under Martha's direction. By late afternoon, Sela's was resting more comfortably, his breathing steadier and his color improved. Martha sat back on her heels with a sigh of relief. "I think the worst has passed. He's strong for his age." "Will he recover?" Daisy asked, wringing out another cloth in warm water. "With proper rest and care, yes. But he can't be moved for at least a few days, and he'll need constant attention." Martha looked exhausted, dark circles forming under her eyes. "I'll stay with him tonight," Ryder offered immediately. Martha shook her head. "You've been up since before dawn dealing with the aftermath of the storm. You need rest too." She glanced at Daisy. "We'll take shifts." "I'll stay first, then Daisy can relieve me before dawn." "I'm happy to help," Daisy assured her, though the thought of being alone in the isolated cabin was somewhat daunting. "Ben and I need to check the herd anyway," Ryder conceded reluctantly. "The storm may have scattered some of the younger cattle. We'll come back at first light with more supplies." As the men prepared to leave, Ryder pulled Martha aside for a private conversation. Daisy busied herself tidying the small space, trying not to eavesdrop but catching fragments nonetheless. "Not sure about leaving you two alone out here. Perfectly capable. Been doing this longer than you. If his condition worsens." After a few more minutes of low-voiced discussion, Ryder approached Daisy. "There are extra blankets in the trunk by the wall and enough firewood stacked outside to last through tomorrow. Keep the rifle loaded and near the door." His blue eyes held hers intently. "If anything happens, anything at all, fire 3 shots in the air. I'll come running." Daisy nodded, touched by his concern. "We'll be fine. Martha knows what she's doing." His mouth quirked in a half-smile. "That she does. Still." He hesitated, then reached out to briefly touch her shoulder, the contact brief but warm through the fabric of her dress. "Be careful." After the men had gone, taking the sleigh back to the main house, Martha collapsed into one of the chairs with a weary groan. "Lord, what a day." Daisy handed her a cup of hot tea. "You were amazing with Sela's. Where did you learn such medical skills?" "Necessity, mostly." Martha sipped the tea gratefully. "Our mother was a midwife back in Missouri. I picked up what I could from her. Then during the war, I volunteered at a field hospital where Ryder was recovering from a wound. Learned a lot more there than I ever wanted to know." This casual mention of Ryder's war injury piqued Daisy's curiosity. "He was wounded," Martha nodded. "Took a bullet in the shoulder at Gettysburg. Nearly died from infection afterward." Her expression grew distant. "Changed him, that experience." "He was different when he came home, quieter, more serious. Some of his friends said the war had made him hard, but that's not it. It made him see what matters." "He said something similar to me once," Daisy murmured, remembering their conversation by the creek. Martha studied her over the rim of her teacup. "My brother doesn't open up to many people. The fact that he discussed the war with you at all is significant." Daisy felt her cheeks warm under Martha's knowing gaze. "I think he was just trying to explain why he helped me." Martha hummed noncommittally. She glanced at Sela's, who was sleeping peacefully, before continuing in a lower voice. "Ryder was engaged before the war, did you know that?" Surprised, Daisy shook her head. "Her name was Eleanor Hargrove." "Pretty girl. from one of the prominent families in our town." Martha's tone held a note of old bitterness. She wrote him a letter while he was recovering in the hospital, said she couldn't wait any longer, that she'd accepted a proposal from the banker's son who hadn't gone to fight. "That's terrible," Daisy whispered, thinking of the pain such a betrayal must have caused. "It broke something in him," Martha agreed. "After that, he threw himself into building this place. 14-hour days, working himself to exhaustion. I don't think I've seen him truly smile in years." She fixed Daisy with a penetrating look. "Until recently." Before Daisy could process the implications of this statement, Silas stirred and groaned softly. Martha immediately set down her tea and moved to his side, effectively ending their conversation. But as the evening progressed, and Martha eventually dozed in the chair while Daisy kept watch, she found her thoughts returning again and again to what she'd learned about Ryder. A man wounded in war, betrayed by the woman he loved, who had rebuilt his life through sheer determination only to risk his hard-won peace by taking in a pregnant stranger. What kind of man did that? And why did her heart beat faster at the thought of him? As promised, Daisy took over watching Silas in the pre-dawn hours, allowing Martha to get some much-needed rest. The cabin was peaceful, the only sounds the crackling of the fire, Silas's steady breathing, and the occasional settling of the log walls in the cold. Outside, the world was still dark, though a faint lightening at the horizon suggested dawn wasn't far off. Daisy stoked the fire and added another log, grateful for the warmth as the temperature had dropped significantly overnight. She had just settled back in the chair beside Silas's bed when the old man's eyes fluttered open. He seemed confused at first, glancing around the unfamiliar surroundings before his gaze settled on her. "Miss Caldwell," he rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, it's me," she confirmed, leaning closer. "Try not to exert yourself. You had a heart spell yesterday." He nodded weakly. "Remember feeling the pain, thought my time had come." He attempted a smile. "Seems the good Lord isn't ready for me yet." "Martha says you're going to recover, but you need rest," Daisy told him, adjusting his blankets. "Would you like some water?" He nodded, and she helped him take a few sips from a cup. As she set it aside, he caught her hand in his weathered one. "You're good for him, you know." Startled, Daisy asked, "For who?" "Ryder." Silas's eyes, though tired, held a sharp clarity. "Known that boy since he came west with nothing but nightmares and determination. Watched him build this place up from scrub and stone. Never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Heat rushed to Daisy's cheeks. "I think you're mistaken. Mr. Blackstone has been kind to me, that's all." Silas made a sound between a chuckle and a cough. "If you say so, miss. But this old heart's seen its share of life, and I know what I know." His eyes drifted closed again. "Man deserves some happiness after everything. So do you, I reckon." Before Daisy could respond, the old man had fallen back asleep, leaving her to ponder his words in the growing light of dawn. True to his word, Ryder arrived with the first light, bringing fresh supplies, hot food from the main house, and news that the paths had been cleared enough for safer travel. His eyes immediately sought out Daisy as he entered the cabin, a brief flash of what might have been relief crossing his features when he saw her unharmed. "How is he?" he asked, setting down his burdens and moving to Silas's bedside. "Better," Martha answered, stretching from her position in the chair where she'd resumed her watch after her brief rest. "His color is good, and he was lucid when he woke earlier." "Good." Ryder nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Ben's bringing the sleigh around. I think we can move him to the main house now that the worst has passed." Within the hour, they had Silas comfortably installed in a downstairs bedroom in the main house, with Martha declaring her intention to stay close until she was certain he was out of danger. exhausted from their night in the cabin. Both women retired for naps while Ryder and Ben saw to the neglected ranch chores. Daisy woke in the late afternoon feeling refreshed but oddly restless. After checking on Silas, who was sleeping peacefully under Martha's watchful eye, she decided to clear her head with some fresh air. Bundling up against the cold, she stepped onto the back porch, marveling at the pristine beauty of the snow-covered landscape. On impulse, she followed the newly cleared path toward the barn, drawn by the sounds of activity within. She found Ryder there, alone, repairing a broken harness with practiced movements of his large hands. He looked up at her entrance, surprise and something else flickering in his eyes before his expression settled into its usual calm. "You should be resting." "I've slept enough," she replied, drawing closer to watch his work. "Besides, I wanted to thank you for coming to check on us this morning." His fingers never stopped their skilled manipulation of the leather straps. "It was nothing." "It wasn't nothing," Daisy countered gently. "You care about the people who depend on you. That's admirable." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Martha's been telling tales about me, hasn't she?" "Some," Daisy admitted. "She holds you in high regard. The feeling's mutual." He set aside the completed repair and turned to face her fully. "Daisy, about what I asked you the other night, I've been thinking about it," she interrupted, surprising herself with the admission. "Your offer of marriage." His expression remained carefully neutral. And Daisy took a deep breath. "Before I give you my answer, I need to know something. Why did you really ask me? The truth, please." For a long moment, Ryder was silent, his blue eyes studying her face as if searching for something. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and earnest. "Because from the moment I saw you on that train platform, something in me recognized something in you. A strength, despite everything you'd been through, a dignity." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of emotional discomfort. "I told myself I was just doing the decent thing, offering you shelter, but it's more than that. You make this place feel like home. In a way it hasn't in years." "Is that enough reason to marry someone?" Daisy asked softly. "For me it is." His gaze held her steadily. "I'm not a poetic man, Daisy. I can't promise you grand passions or flowery declarations. But I can promise you honesty, respect, and my absolute commitment to you and your child. If that's not enough, it is," she whispered, her heart pounding. "It's enough." Something like hope dawned in his eyes. "Does that mean yes?" Daisy said, finding certainty in the word as she spoke it. "I'll marry you, Ryder Blackstone." For a moment, he seemed frozen, as if he hadn't truly expected her to accept. Then, with careful deliberation, he stepped forward and took her hand in his. The calloused warmth of his palm against hers sent a shiver up her arm that had nothing to do with the winter chill. "I'll do right by you," he promised, his thumb brushing gently over her knuckles. "Both of you." The sincerity in his voice brought tears to Daisy's eyes. This wasn't the romantic proposal she'd dreamed of as a girl, but somehow it felt more real, more honest than any pretty words could have been. "I know you will," she said, and meant it. Their wedding took place 2 weeks later in the small church in Yarrington. It was a simple ceremony, attended only by Martha, Silas, who insisted on being there despite his recent health scare, Ben, and a few ranchers from neighboring properties whom Ryder counted as friends. Daisy wore a new dark blue dress that Martha had helped her make, with a small bunch of dried flowers from the pantry stocks pinned to her bodice. Ryder looked unusually formal in a clean black suit, his hair neatly combed and his beard trimmed for the occasion. The minister, a kindly older man named Reverend Porter, made no comment about Daisy's visible pregnancy, treating the ceremony with the same dignity and solemnity he would have accorded any couple. When Ryder slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, Martha's suggestion, purchased during a special trip to Carson City, Daisy felt a strange mix of emotions: gratitude, hope, and something deeper she wasn't yet ready to name. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the Reverend declared. And just like that, Daisy Caldwell became Daisy Blackstone, a rancher's wife with a future far different from anything she could have imagined that day at the train station. The wedding supper back at the ranch was a cheerful, if modest, affair. Martha had outdone herself with a roast chicken, fresh bread, and even a small cake decorated with preserved berries. There was laughter and good-natured teasing, especially from Silas, who seemed determined to make Ryder blush with his ribald humor. To the Blackstones, Martha proposed a toast, her eyes suspiciously bright. "May your union bring you both the happiness you deserve." As the evening wound down and the guests departed, Daisy found herself increasingly nervous about what would come next. She and Ryder had not discussed the practical aspects of their marriage beyond his assurance that she would have her own room for as long as she wished it. When they were finally alone in the main room, Ryder cleared his throat. "I'd been move your things to the larger bedroom at the end of the hall. It has its own small sitting area. Thought you might appreciate the extra space." "Thank you," Daisy said, touched by his thoughtfulness. "And you'll—" "I'll keep my room across the hall," he answered quickly. "Like we discussed, this arrangement doesn't have to be traditional unless you want it to be, someday, if ever." He looked so uncomfortable that Daisy had to suppress a smile. "I appreciate that," she said sincerely. "It's been a long day. I think I'll retire now," he nodded, relief evident in his posture. "Good night, Mrs. Blackstone." The name sent an unexpected thrill through her. "Good night, Ryder." In the privacy of her new room, their room, technically, though Ryder showed no signs of claiming it, Daisy changed into her nightgown and sat before the small mirror to brush her hair. The gold band on her finger caught the lamplight, gleaming softly. Mrs. Ryder Blackstone. A name, an identity, a protection for her and her child. It was everything she'd needed, delivered by a man whose quiet strength and integrity had begun to work their way into her heart, despite her best intentions. As winter settled over the Double B, Daisy's days fell into a pleasant routine. She continued to help Martha with household duties, though now as the mistress of the house rather than a hired helper. Her pregnancy advanced steadily, her belly growing more pronounced as December turned to January. Ryder remained true to his word, treating her with unfailing respect and consideration, while maintaining a careful physical distance. They shared meals, conversations about the ranch, occasional evenings by the fire when he would read aloud from one of the books in the small shelf in the main room, but he never presumed upon their marital status. Sometimes, though, Daisy would catch him watching her with an expression that made her heart beat faster, a mixture of concern, admiration, and something warmer that he quickly masked whenever he noticed her attention. For her part, Daisy found herself increasingly drawn to her taciturn husband. She began to recognize the subtle signs of his moods, the slight furrow between his brows when he was worried about the cattle, the barely perceptible softening around his eyes when something amused him, the way he absently rubbed his left shoulder when he was tired or when a storm was brewing. One evening in late January, as a particularly vicious blizzard howled around the house, Daisy sat in the main room mending one of Ryder's shirts. Martha had retired early with one of her occasional headaches, and Silas and Ben were playing checkers at the kitchen table, their good-natured arguments drifting through the open doorway. The front door burst open with a gust of snow and freezing air as Ryder returned from his final check of the outbuildings. He stamped his boots and shrugged out of his heavy coat, hanging it by the door. "Everything secure?" Daisy asked, setting aside her mending. "For now." He moved to the fireplace, extending his hands toward the flames. "If this keeps up, we might lose some of the younger calves. Can't get to them in this weather." Daisy could hear the worry in his voice. The cattle were the ranch's livelihood, and each loss was felt keenly. "Can I get you some coffee? There's still some hot on the stove," he nodded gratefully. "Please." When she returned with the steaming mug, she noticed he was rubbing his left shoulder, his face tight with discomfort. "Your war wound?" she asked softly, setting the coffee on the small table beside his chair. "Martha mentioned you were injured at Gettysburg." Surprise flickered across his face. "Did she now? My sister talks too much." Despite his gruff response, there was no real annoyance in his tone. Daisy took a chance and moved behind his chair. "May I?" she asked, her hands hovering above his shoulders. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded once, a short, jerky movement. Gently, Daisy began to massage his shoulders through the fabric of his shirt, feeling the tension knotted there. At first he remained stiff under her touch, but gradually, as her fingers worked the tight muscles, he began to relax. "My father had rheumatism," she explained, working on a particularly stubborn knot. "I used to do this for him when the pain was bad." "Feels good," Ryder admitted, his voice rougher than usual. "Thank you." Emboldened by his response, Daisy continued her ministrations, moving to the specific area where she knew his old wound must be. He tensed momentarily when her fingers found the spot, then exhaled slowly as she worked with careful pressure. "The bullet shattered my collarbone," he said unexpectedly. "Doctors said I was lucky it missed the major blood vessels. Doesn't usually bother me except in cold weather." "You never talk about the war," Daisy observed, keeping her touch gentle but firm. "Not much to say that's worth hearing." He took a sip of his coffee. "Saw things no man should see. Did things I'm not proud of. Came home to find the woman I thought I'd marry had found someone else." The casual way he mentioned his former fiancée surprised Daisy. "Martha told me about Alina." A short laugh escaped him. "Did she tell you it was the best thing that could have happened to me? Because it was." He twisted in the chair to look up at her. "If Alina had waited, I'd be back in Missouri now, probably working in her father's dry goods store, miserable as hell but too stubborn to admit it." "Instead, you have all this," Daisy said, gesturing to encompass the ranch. "Instead, I have all this," he agreed, his gaze holding hers with sudden intensity. "And now I have you." Something in his voice, a note of wonder, of possession, sent a shiver through Daisy that had nothing to do with the winter cold. Her hands stilled on his shoulders, and for a long moment they simply looked at each other, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. The spell was broken by a particularly violent gust of wind that rattled the windows, making them both jump slightly. Daisy stepped back, suddenly self-conscious. "I should check on Martha," she murmured, though there was no real need. Ryder nodded, releasing her from his gaze. "Thank you for—" He gestured vaguely to his shoulder. "Anytime," she replied, meaning it more than she'd expected to. That night, as Daisy lay in her bed listening to the storm rage outside, she found herself thinking about the way Ryder had looked at her as if seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time. Not as a charity case or a convenient solution to his household needs, but as a woman. A woman he might actually want. The realization brought with it a fluttering warmth in her chest, and a longing she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge before. Perhaps this marriage of convenience was becoming something else entirely, something neither of them had anticipated. February brought a brief thaw, allowing the men to check on the outlying cattle and repair some of the damage the winter storms had caused. Daisy, now in her 8th month of pregnancy, found herself increasingly uncomfortable and confined to the house. Martha proved an invaluable companion during this time, sharing wisdom about childbirth and infant care that helped ease some of Daisy's growing anxiety. "My first time delivering a baby, I was so nervous I nearly fainted," she confided one afternoon as they sorted through baby clothes she'd unearthed from an old trunk. "But women have been doing this since the beginning of time. Your body knows what to do. Were these yours as a child?" Daisy asked, holding up a tiny yellowed gown. Martha's expression softened with old sadness. "No, they belonged to Ryder's son." Daisy's hands froze on the delicate fabric. "Ryder has a child." The thought sent a strange pang through her heart. "Had," Martha corrected gently. "His wife Sarah and their baby boy died in childbirth before he came west. It's not my story to tell, but I thought you should know. He's never spoken of them to anyone here." Stunned, Daisy carefully folded the small gown and set it aside. "He was married before, very briefly." They'd been married less than a year when Sarah went into labor early. Neither she nor the baby survived. Martha sighed. "It's why he was so quick to join up when the war came. He had nothing left to lose." This revelation cast Ryder's proposal in an entirely new light. No wonder he'd been so quick to offer marriage to a pregnant woman in need. He understood loss in a way few could. And perhaps he saw in Daisy and her unborn child a chance to heal old wounds, to protect another mother and baby from a similar fate. The knowledge settled like a weight in Daisy's chest. Had she simply been a replacement for his lost family? A second chance to do things right? The thought was both comforting and distressing. That evening, when Ryder returned from his day's work, Daisy watched him with new eyes. There was a sadness in him she'd always sensed, but never fully understood until now. How much grief had this man carried alone all these years? After supper, while Martha and Silas played cards in the kitchen, Daisy found herself alone with Ryder in the main room. He was reviewing the ranch ledgers, his brow furrowed in concentration, while she ostensibly worked on a small quilt for the baby. "Martha showed me the baby clothes today," she said finally, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Ryder's pencil stilled on the page. Without looking up, he asked, "Did she tell you who they belonged to?" "Yes." Daisy set her sewing aside. "Why didn't you tell me you'd been married before, that you'd lost a child?" He closed the ledger slowly. "It was a long time ago, another life." "But it shaped who you are," Daisy persisted gently. "It's part of why you helped me that day at the station, isn't it?" Ryder finally met her gaze, his blue eyes troubled. "Maybe. I don't analyze my decisions that closely." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Sarah was 19. Too young, too small for such a difficult birth. The doctor said there was nothing anyone could have done, but "You still blame yourself," Daisy finished softly. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "A man's supposed to protect his family." Moved by his pain, Daisy rose awkwardly from her chair, no easy feat in her current condition, and crossed to where he sat. Without hesitation, she took his hand in hers. "You couldn't have known what would happen, just as you can't know what will happen when my time comes." His fingers tightened around hers. "That's different. Martha's delivered dozens of babies, and Carson City's only a day's ride if there's trouble." "Ryder," Daisy said firmly, waiting until he looked up at her. "I'm not Sarah, and this baby isn't going to replace the one you lost. We're different people, writing a different story." For a long moment he simply stared at her, a complex mixture of emotions crossing his face. Then, with a gentleness that belied his strength, he drew her down to sit beside him on the small sofa. "I know you're not Sarah," he said quietly. "I never thought of you as a replacement, Daisy. That's not why I married you." "Then why did you?" she asked, needing to hear the answer. He looked down at their joined hands. "Because you needed me. And because, selfish as it sounds, I needed you too. This house, this ranch, it was just a place until you came. Now it feels like home again." The simple honesty of his words touched something deep inside her. Without thinking, Daisy leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a soft, tentative kiss. For a heartbeat, Ryder remained still, as if shocked by her boldness. Then, with a sound that might have been a groan, he returned the kiss, his hand coming up to cradle her cheek with exquisite care. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Daisy saw something new in his eyes, a warmth, a hunger carefully restrained but unmistakably present. "I should let you rest," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "It's getting late." Daisy nodded, suddenly shy despite her earlier boldness. "Good night, Ryder." As she made her way upstairs to her room, she felt lighter somehow, as if a barrier between them had finally begun to crumble. They had married for practical reasons: convenience, protection, respectability, but something else was growing between them. Something neither had anticipated but both increasingly welcomed. That night, as she lay in bed feeling her baby's restless movements, Daisy allowed herself to imagine a future where their family was bound by love as well as necessity. For the first time since James's betrayal, she dared to hope for happiness, real happiness, not just survival. Little did she know that their newfound closeness would soon be tested by events neither of them could have foreseen. The baby came early. It was a clear, cold morning in late February, when Daisy felt the first sharp pain lance through her lower back. She was alone in the kitchen, kneading bread dough, while Martha had gone to town for supplies and the men were out checking fence lines damaged in the latest storm. At first, she dismissed it as the normal discomfort of late pregnancy. But when a second, stronger pain gripped her 20 minutes later, followed by a warm gush of fluid down her legs, she knew with sudden certainty that her time had come weeks earlier than expected. Fear clutched at her heart as she clutched the edge of the table, breathing through the contraction. She was alone in the house, miles from town, with no way to summon help. "Stay calm," she told herself aloud. "Just stay calm." When the pain subsided, she managed to make her way to the back door and outside to the yard. If she could reach the horn Ryder kept hanging by the barn door, their signal for emergencies, perhaps someone would hear it and return. The distance to the barn had never seemed so far. Halfway there, another contraction seized her, stronger than before, forcing her to stop and lean against the water pump, gasping for breath. "Mrs. Blackstone," Ben's voice, concerned and surprised, came from behind her. "What are you doing out here without a coat?" Daisy turned to see the young ranch hand approaching from the direction of the bunkhouse, concern written across his face. "The baby," she managed through gritted teeth. "It's coming. Need, Martha, Ryder." Understanding dawned in Ben's eyes, followed immediately by panic. "Right now." "But it's too early. Babies don't always keep to schedules," Daisy said, attempting a weak smile that turned into a grimace as another contraction began. "Please, Ben, help me back to the house and then find Ryder." The young man sprang into action, supporting her weight as they slowly made their way back to the kitchen. Once he had her settled in a chair, he grabbed his hat and coat. "I'll ride out to find them right away. Ryder and Silas are checking the north pasture fence. Should be about 2 miles out." "Hurry," Daisy urged, feeling another contraction building. "And Ben, if you can't find them quickly, go for Martha in town. She'll know what to do." With a nod, he was gone, leaving Daisy alone to face the intensifying labor. Drawing on every ounce of her courage and the knowledge Martha had shared, she began to prepare as best she could. She set water to boil, gathered clean linens from the cupboard, and made her way painfully upstairs to her bedroom, stopping every few minutes as contractions seized her body. By the time she heard hoofbeats in the yard, perhaps an hour later, the pains were coming close together, and Daisy knew the birth was progressing rapidly, too rapidly for a first-time mother, according to what Martha had told her. Daisy. Ryder's voice called from below, followed by the sound of boots pounding up the stairs. "In here," she called, relief washing over her as the bedroom door burst open to reveal her husband, his face pale with concern. "The baby's coming," she said unnecessarily, clutching the bedpost as another contraction gripped her. "Ben went for Martha," Ryder said, moving to her side. "But it's snowing again in the pass. He might not make it back with her in time." Daisy nodded, fighting back tears of fear. "Then it's just us." Something shifted in Ryder's expression, a steeling of resolve, a pushing away of personal terror. "I've helped birth hundreds of calves. Can't be that different." He attempted a reassuring smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "What do you need me to do?" Despite her pain, Daisy felt a surge of love for this man who was clearly terrified but determined not to show it. "Help me onto the bed. Then I need clean towels, hot water, and scissors boiled if possible." As Ryder helped her arrange herself on the bed, Daisy caught his hand. "Ryder, listen to me. If something happens, nothing's going to happen," he cut her off, his voice fierce. "You're going to be fine, both of you." The intensity in his eyes gave her strength. She nodded and released his hand, allowing him to gather the supplies they would need. The next few hours passed in a haze of pain and determination for Daisy. The labor progressed rapidly, her body knowing what to do even as her mind struggled with fear. Ryder remained by her side, wiping her brow with cool cloths, supporting her back when she needed to change positions, speaking words of encouragement that grew increasingly desperate as her strength began to wane. "I can't," she gasped after a particularly brutal contraction. "I can't do this, Ryder." "Yes, you can." He gripped her hand tightly. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known, Daisy Blackstone. You survived being abandoned, you built a new life here, you faced everything with courage. This baby needs that courage now." As if in response to his words, Daisy felt a new pressure, an overwhelming urge to push. "It's time," she whispered. What happened next would remain somewhat blurry in Daisy's memory: the pain, the desperate pushing, Ryder's steady voice guiding her, and finally, the miraculous moment when a new cry pierced the air, thin and outraged. "It's a boy," Ryder announced, his voice thick with emotion as he carefully cradled the tiny, red-faced infant. "A perfect boy." Tears streamed down Daisy's face as Ryder placed the swaddled newborn on her chest. She looked down at her son, so small, so vulnerable, with a shock of dark hair and a determined little chin. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." When she looked up, she was startled to see tears on Ryder's cheeks as well. He made no move to wipe them away, his gaze fixed on the baby with an expression of wonder and fierce protectiveness. "He's beautiful," he said hoarsely. "Like his mother." In that moment, something shifted between them, a final barrier falling away. This child, not of Ryder's blood but now undeniably his by choice, had forged a bond between them stronger than any legal document or convenient arrangement. "Would you like to hold your son?" Daisy asked softly. Ryder looked startled, then deeply moved by her choice of words. With infinite gentleness, he took the baby from her arms, cradling him as if he were made of the most precious glass. "Hello, son," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "Welcome to the world." Martha arrived an hour later, hurrying into the bedroom with her medical bag, prepared for the worst. What she found instead was Daisy propped up on pillows, pale but smiling, with Ryder seated beside her on the bed, their newborn son sleeping peacefully in his arms. "Well," Martha said, setting down her bag with a relieved smile. Looks like you two managed just fine without me." "Not entirely by choice," Ryder replied, reluctantly surrendering the baby to his sister's experienced hands for examination. "He was in a hurry to meet us." "He seems perfect," Martha pronounced after a thorough check. "Small but strong. You did well, both of you." That night, after Martha had helped Daisy bathe and change into a clean nightgown, and after the baby had been fed and settled in the cradle Ryder had brought up from the attic, Daisy found herself alone with her husband once more. He sat in the chair beside her bed, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "You should rest," he said softly. "It's been a long day." "Stay," she replied, patting the edge of the bed beside her. "Just for a while." After a moment's hesitation, he moved to sit where she'd indicated. "How are you feeling?" "Tired, sore," she smiled. "Happy." His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Have you thought about a name?" Daisy nodded. "I'd like to call him Thomas after my father, but—" She hesitated, then gathered her courage. "I'd like his middle name to be James." Ryder's expression darkened slightly. "After the man who abandoned you?" "No," Daisy said firmly. "After your son. Martha told me his name was James." Shock registered on Ryder's face, followed by a complex mixture of grief and gratitude. "You do that. This baby represents a new beginning for both of us," Daisy explained softly. "But I don't want either of us to forget the past that shaped us." Thomas James Blackstone, carrying forward the memory of those we've loved and lost while building something new together. Ryder's throat worked as he struggled with emotion. Finally, he managed. "Thomas James. It's a good name. A strong name." Daisy squeezed his hand. "Ryder, I need to tell you something." His expression grew guarded. "What is it?" "When you found me at that train station, I'd given up hope. I thought my life was over, that I'd be forever defined by one mistake, one man's betrayal." Her voice caught, but she pressed on. "But you saw something in me worth saving. You gave me shelter, respect, your name. And somewhere along the way, I found myself falling in love with you." The naked vulnerability in her admission hung between them. For a terrible moment, Ryder simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, with a gentleness that belied his strength, he leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers. "I think I started falling for you that first day," he confessed against her lips. "You were so brave, so proud even in your distress. I told myself I was just doing the right thing, but the truth is, I couldn't bear the thought of you walking away." Joy surged through Daisy's heart. "So we're both fools," she whispered. "Seems that way," he agreed, a rare full smile transforming his features. "But lucky ones." From the cradle came a small, indignant cry, announcing that Thomas James Blackstone was awake and demanding attention. Ryder rose and lifted the tiny bundle, bringing him to Daisy with a reverence that made her heart swell. "I love you," he said simply, as he placed their son in her arms. "Both of you." "And we love you," Daisy replied, knowing with absolute certainty that it was true. In that moment, in the warmth of their bedroom with the winter wind howling outside, Daisy understood that she had found something precious beyond measure. Not just shelter or security, but a true home, a true family, a true love. From the depths of despair at that lonely train station, she had journeyed to a place of joy she'd never dared imagine. And it had all begun with a cowboy who'd said, "You're not alone anymore." Spring came to the Double B Ranch in a rush of green and gold, transforming the winter-brown landscape into a vibrant tapestry of wildflowers and new grass. 3 months had passed since Thomas's birth, and the baby was thriving, his initial smallness giving way to chubby cheeks and an infectious smile that charmed everyone on the ranch. For Daisy, motherhood had been both more challenging and more rewarding than she'd anticipated. There were sleepless nights and moments of uncertainty, but they were balanced by the indescribable joy of watching her son grow and develop day by day. Even more surprising was the transformation in her marriage. What had begun as an arrangement of convenience had blossomed into a deep and genuine love. Ryder had moved his belongings into their shared bedroom the day after Thomas's birth, and each night since, Daisy had fallen asleep in the security of his arms, marveling at how completely her life had changed in the span of a few short months. On a particularly fine April morning, Daisy sat on the front porch, Thomas sleeping peacefully in a basket beside her while she shelled peas for dinner. The sound of approaching hooves made her look up to see Ryder returning from town, a package tied to his saddle. "Mail came," he announced as he dismounted, handing her several envelopes before retrieving the package. "And Martha's birthday present finally arrived." Daisy smiled. They'd ordered a new dress pattern and fabric from the Sears catalog weeks ago as a surprise for Martha, whose birthday was the following week. "She'll be thrilled. The blue will suit her perfectly." Ryder nodded, then hesitated, his expression growing more serious. "There's something else." "News in town." "Oh." Daisy set aside the peas, suddenly alert to the tension in his posture. "Train conductor recognized me at the station. Asked if I was still harboring that poor abandoned girl from last fall." Ryder's jaw tightened. "Said a man's been asking questions in Virginia City and Carson City, looking for a young pregnant woman who disappeared in October." A cold knot formed in Daisy's stomach. "James," she whispered. There was no doubt in her mind. "What did you tell the conductor?" "That my wife and I have been married since November, and that our son was born in February." Ryder's voice was calm, but Daisy could see the concern in his eyes. "But word travels, Daisy. If he's looking this hard, he might eventually find his way to Yerington." "Why would he be looking for me now?" Daisy asked, her arms instinctively reaching for Thomas. "He made it very clear he wanted nothing to do with us." Ryder shook his head. "I don't know, but I thought you should be prepared just in case." For days afterward, Daisy found herself starting at every approaching rider, her heart racing until she could confirm it wasn't James. She hadn't spoken his full name to Ryder, the wound of his betrayal still too fresh, but now she found herself explaining everything. How James Harrington had courted her after her parents' death, promising marriage and security. How she'd succumbed to his charm and allowed him liberties she'd been raised to reserve for marriage. And finally, how he'd abandoned her when she told him she was carrying his child. "I was such a fool," she concluded, tears of old shame burning her eyes as they sat together after Thomas had been put to bed. "I believed everything he said because I was lonely and frightened of facing life alone." "You weren't a fool," Ryder countered, his arm tight around her shoulders. "You were young and grieving. He took advantage." "Still, I should have known." Ryder's voice was firm. "No more blaming yourself. Whatever his reasons for looking for you now, you owe him nothing. You're my wife. Thomas is my son in every way that matters. If this James shows up here thinking otherwise, he'll answer to me." The fierce protectiveness in his voice both comforted and concerned Daisy. "I don't want trouble, Ryder. I don't want anyone hurt because of my past mistakes." "There won't be trouble unless he brings it," Ryder assured her. "But I won't let him upset the life we've built. I promise you that." Despite his reassurances, worry nagged at Daisy. What could James possibly want after all this time? Money? Recognition? Or something worse, custody of the child he'd once rejected? She didn't have long to wait for answers. A week later, as she was hanging laundry in the yard with Thomas napping nearby in his basket, the sound of an approaching buggy drew her attention. It wasn't a vehicle she recognized, and the man driving it was a stranger until he drew closer, and Daisy felt her blood run cold. James Harrington looked much as she remembered. Handsome in a polished, almost artificial way, with carefully styled dark hair and expensive clothing. As he brought the buggy to a stop and stepped down, his gaze landed on her with an expression of triumph. "Daisy," he called, his voice carrying the same smooth charm that had once captivated her. "I've been looking everywhere for you, my dear." Instinctively, Daisy moved to stand between him and Thomas's basket. "What are you doing here, James?" He approached slowly, hands spread in a gesture of innocence. "Is that any way to greet the father of your child? I've come to make things right, Daisy." "There's nothing to make right," she replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You made your choice when you put me on that train with a note saying you wanted nothing to do with us." A flicker of annoyance crossed his handsome features. "I was hasty. I've regretted it every day since." He glanced around the ranch property. "So this is where you ended up. Quaint, I suppose, in a rustic way." "This is my home," Daisy said firmly, "and you're not welcome here." James sighed dramatically. "Come now, Daisy, don't be difficult. My family has had a change of heart. They're prepared to accept you and the child, provided we marry immediately. I've come to take you back to Virginia City." Daisy stared at him in disbelief. "Marry you? Are you mad? I'm already married." For the first time, James looked genuinely surprised. "Married to whom?" "To me," Ryder's deep voice came from behind her. He must have seen the unfamiliar buggy from the fields and come to investigate. Now he stood at Daisy's side, his presence solid and reassuring. "Ryder Blackstone, and you're trespassing on my property." James recovered quickly, his expression shifting to one of calculated charm. "Ah, I see. There's been a misunderstanding. I'm James Harrington from Virginia City. I'm afraid Daisy and I have unfinished business." "No, we don't," Daisy interjected firmly. "Whatever brought you here, James, you're wasting your time. I have a husband, a home, a family. I want nothing from you." James's pleasant facade slipped slightly. "The child is mine, Daisy, my son, my heir." "You gave up any claim to him when you abandoned us," Daisy shot back, anger replacing her initial fear. "Thomas is Ryder's son in every way that matters." "Thomas?" James looked genuinely thrown. "You named my son Thomas." "My son," Ryder corrected, his voice dangerously quiet. "My name's on his birth certificate. I was there when he came into this world. I've held him every day of his life. What have you done except reject him before he was even born?" A tense silence followed his words. Daisy could feel the anger radiating from Ryder, carefully controlled but potent. James glanced between them, clearly reassessing the situation. "I see I've arrived too late," he said finally, his tone cooler. "But you should know, Daisy, that my family has connections, legal connections. If I choose to pursue my rights as the child's natural father, then you'll lose," Ryder cut in, taking a step forward that made James instinctively back up. "You put your rejection in writing, Harrington. That letter you gave her, she kept it. Any judge would recognize Daisy's marriage and my claim as legal and binding." This was news to Daisy. She hadn't realized Ryder knew about the letter, much less that he'd considered its legal implications. James hesitated, uncertainty crossing his features. "My family has money, influence, and I have the truth," Ryder replied simply. "Plus the respect of every judge in this county. How do you think that will play out in a Western courtroom, Harrington? A man who abandoned a pregnant woman against a husband who stood by her and the child. You want to take that gamble, be my guest." From the basket came a small whimper as Thomas began to wake. All three adults glanced toward the sound, but it was Daisy who moved to lift her son, cradling him protectively against her shoulder. "Look at him, James," she said quietly. "Really look at him. He's healthy, happy, loved. He has a father who adores him, who would do anything for him. Is your pride, your family's so-called honor, worth destroying that? For a moment, something like genuine emotion crossed James's face as he gazed at the baby. Regret, perhaps, or simple recognition of what he'd thrown away. Then his expression hardened. Keep the brat, then. He's probably not even mine. You weren't exactly discriminating, were you, Daisy? The cruel words hung in the air for a heartbeat before Ryder moved with surprising speed, grabbing James by the collar and nearly lifting him off his feet. You will apologize to my wife, he said, his voice a low growl. Now, fear flashed in James's eyes. I apologize for the remark, he stammered. It was uncalled for. Ryder released him with a slight shove. Get back in that buggy and leave my property. Don't come back. If I ever see your face around here again or hear that you've been spreading lies about my wife, you'll answer to me. Understood? James straightened his jacket with shaking hands, his composure thoroughly broken. This isn't over, he muttered, but the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. Yes, it is, Daisy said with quiet finality. Goodbye, James. They watched in silence as he climbed back into the buggy and drove away, the dust from the wheels settling in the spring air. Only when he was completely out of sight did Daisy release the breath she'd been holding. Are you all right? Ryder asked, his voice gentle as he turned to her. Daisy nodded, surprised to discover it was true. I am. Seeing him again. It didn't affect me the way I thought it might. He seems so small now compared to what we have. Ryder's expression softened as he looked at her and Thomas. You were magnificent, standing up to him like that. So were you. She leaned against his solid strength. Did you really keep the letter he wrote me? Found it in your trunk when we moved your things to our bedroom, Ryder admitted. Thought it might be important someday. Legally, I mean. You were thinking ahead even then, he shrugged. Force of habit. Running a ranch teaches you to prepare for all possibilities. His arm tightened around her. But I meant what I said. Thomas is my son in every way that matters. As if recognizing his name, the baby gurgled and reached a tiny hand toward Ryder's face. Without hesitation, Ryder took Thomas from Daisy's arms, lifting him high before settling him securely against his chest. No one's going to take you away from us, little man, he promised softly. Not ever. Watching them together, this man who had given her a home and her son who had given her a reason to keep going when all seemed lost, Daisy felt a surge of gratitude so powerful, it brought tears to her eyes. From the depths of despair at that train station, she had found her way to a love deeper and truer than anything she'd ever imagined possible. Come on, Ryder said, extending his free hand to her. Let's go inside. Martha's making apple pie for supper. Such an ordinary statement, yet to Daisy, it represented everything she'd gained. Family, stability, the simple daily rhythms of a life shared with people who truly cared for her. She took his hand, feeling the familiar callous strength of his fingers as they intertwined with hers. I love you, she said simply, because it was the truest thing she knew. His blue eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his face and never failed to make her heart skip. I love you too, Daisy Blackstone, more than I have words to say. Together, they walked back toward the house, husband, wife, and child, their shadows stretching long and united across the land they both now called home. 5 years passed with the changing seasons, each one bringing new growth to both the Double B Ranch and the Blackstone family. Thomas grew from a baby to a sturdy, curious boy with his mother's gentle heart and his father's quiet determination. And 2 years after his birth, he was joined by a sister, Anna Elizabeth, born on a summer evening amid a chorus of cicadas and with far less drama than her brother's arrival. The ranch prospered under Ryder's careful management, expanding to include new grazing lands and a small apple orchard that had been Daisy's idea. Martha had indeed moved to Sacramento eventually, though she returned for extended visits several times a year, delighting in her role as doting aunt to her brother's children. James Harrington never returned to the Double B, though they heard through town gossip that he had married a banker's daughter in Carson City and moved east, apparently putting his Nevada adventures behind him. The news had caused Daisy a moment's reflection, but no regret her life had taken the path it was meant to follow. On a crisp October afternoon in 1883, exactly 5 years after Ryder had found Daisy at the Yerington train station, the family gathered on the front porch of the ranch house. Ryder sat in his favorite chair, whittling a small wooden horse for Thomas, while Daisy mended a tear in Anna's dress. The children played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the autumn breeze. "You know what day it is?" Daisy asked, glancing up from her sewing to find Ryder watching her with a tender expression. "Of course I do," he replied. 5 years ago today, I found a stubborn, proud young woman sitting on her trunk at the station, trying her best to look like she wasn't terrified. Daisy smiled at the memory, now softened by time and happiness. "I was terrified, and then this intimidating cowboy appeared out of nowhere and told me I wasn't alone anymore." "Best words I ever spoke," Ryder said quietly, "though I had no idea where they'd lead us. No regrets." Daisy asked, though she already knew the answer. Ryder set aside his carving and reached for her hand. "Not a single one. You." Daisy looked out at their children Thomas with Ryder's thoughtful expression as he carefully constructed a fort from twigs. Anna with her mother's curls bouncing as she arranged pebbles in precise patterns. Then she turned back to her husband, the man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved, whose love had transformed her life. "How could I regret anything that led me here?" she answered softly. "Everything, even the pain and uncertainty, brought me to you, to our children, to this life we've built together." Ryder's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand, a gesture of affection that had become as natural as breathing over the years. "Remember that first morning you made breakfast at the ranch? You dropped an entire tray of biscuits when Silas came in from the barn unexpectedly." Daisy laughed at the memory. "I was so nervous, trying to prove I could earn my keep. And you just calmly picked them up, dusted them off, and ate them anyway, saying they were the best you'd ever tasted." "They were like rocks," Ryder admitted with a grin. "But I meant what I said about them being the best because you'd made them." "Charmer," Daisy teased, though her heart warmed at the sentiment. From the yard came a sudden wail as Anna toppled over, more startled than hurt. Before either parent could move, Thomas was at his sister's side, helping her up with the serious care of an older brother who took his responsibilities to heart. "He's so much like you," Daisy observed, watching as Thomas solemnly examined Anna's scraped palm before declaring it would heal better with a cookie. "Manipulative little rascal," Ryder chuckled. "That's all you." Their banter was interrupted by the sound of approaching riders. A moment later, Ben appeared around the bend in the road, accompanied by a stranger. Though no longer the gangly youth he'd been when Daisy first arrived, Ben still worked at the Double B, now as Ryder's foreman. "Ryder from town," he called as they approached. "Brought a telegram for you, boss." Ryder frowned slightly. Telegrams were rare and usually meant important news, sometimes good, sometimes troubling. He rose to meet the messenger, accepting the folded paper with a word of thanks and a coin for the delivery. Daisy watched as he read the brief message, his expression changing from concern to surprise to something that looked remarkably like joy. "What is it?" she asked when he remained silent, staring at the paper in his hand. "It's from Martha," he said finally, looking up with a smile that transformed his features. "She's coming home." "For a visit?" Daisy asked, confused by his reaction to what should have been routine news. Ryder shook his head. "For good. Says she's done with city living and wants to come home to the Double B." He handed her the telegram. "She asks if we'd mind her building a small house on the south quarter, near the old cabin. Says she's too old to live under the same roof as those rambunctious children, but wants to be close enough to spoil them properly." Daisy read the message, happiness welling up inside her. Martha's visits, while cherished, had always been too brief. The thought of having her sister-in-law permanently nearby was wonderful, not just for the children, who adored their aunt, but for Daisy herself, who had come to love Martha like the sister she'd never had. "We should start planning the house right away," she said eagerly. "We could use some of those new designs from that magazine I saw in town, something with plenty of light for her sewing." Ryder laughed, pulling her into his arms. "Slow down. She's not arriving until next month. We have time." Daisy nestled against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and pine, and the indefinable essence that was simply Ryder. "It feels right, having her come home, completing our family circle." "It does," he agreed, his voice rumbling pleasantly against her cheek. "The Double B has always been about family, even when it was just me and my stubborn dreams. Now it's what it was always meant to be." Thomas and Anna, having spotted their father embracing their mother, came running across the yard, demanding to be included. Ryder laughed and scooped Anna up with one arm while ruffling Thomas's hair with his free hand. "What's happening?" Thomas asked, always observant. "Why are you hugging Mama in the middle of the day?" "Because I love her," Ryder answered simply, "and because we have good news. Aunt Martha is coming to live near us, for good this time." The children's excited reactions brought more laughter, more questions, more plans enthusiastically shared and built upon. As the afternoon light gilded the scene in warm gold, Daisy looked around at her family, her handsome, steadfast husband, her healthy, happy children, the prosperous ranch that had become the backdrop to their shared life, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. 5 years ago, she had been alone, desperate, with no hope and no future she could imagine. Now she stood at the center of a life rich with love, purpose, and belonging. All because a stern-faced cowboy had extended his hand to a stranger in need and said 7 simple words that had changed everything. "You're not alone anymore." As if reading her thoughts, Ryder met her gaze over the children's excited chatter, his blue eyes warm with a love that had only deepened with time and shared experiences. In that look was a promise renewed daily through actions rather than words, that she would never be alone again, that they would face whatever came, joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges together. And Daisy knew, with the certainty that comes from a love tested and proven true, that it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.